warm welcome, everybody. We still have some people joining us. It's a delight for me to welcome you all to the Reshaping Governance in a Sustainable Era. This webinar and dialogue is co-hosted with Board's Impact Forum and with INSEAD's Corporate Governance Centre. My name is Liselott Engstam, and I work as a chair of the Board's Impact Forum, also a member of the global board of the Climate Governance Initiative. And I'm also affiliated in many ways with INSEAD. For the rest, I work as the rest of you as a non-executive board director. Today, we have a very interesting agenda for you. And so we will have a presentation of a research and findings conducted by INSEAD Corporate Governance Centre together with Heidrick Struggles and BCG. And many of you who are on this have also answered to this, so we're very grateful for that. This is actually the third time we're running this webinar. This is a multi-year experience. And we're delighted to have this collaboration. The presentation will be done by Ron Sunius, which is the senior advisor at BCG, and Alice Breeden, who work with Heidrick Struggles. Then we will listen to you. We will hear your perspectives in a poll, and then you will actually discuss this in breakout rooms. We will reconvene you back to share experiences, and then we will have a panel discussion. And most of our panelists here now, some will join later. So we're very glad to have Julie Badley and Jeff Scott. Bent might join us, Sonia Tatar from INSEAD, Ron and Alice to join us in this panel. And then we're going to wrap up and hope that you will send you all off with some good actions. So we have a bit of webinar etiquette. As you can see, we're running this not as a webinar, but as a meeting, because we want to increase the collaboration and the discussion, because we have found that that's a very good way for all of us to learn more. So please keep your microphones muted during the presentation and during the panel, and obviously not when you get into the breakout rooms. We will keep the chat box open, and it's for comments and insights and questions to each other or to the primarily to the presenters and the panelists. It's going to be moderated by Fernanda Torre, who is the operations director of Board's Impact Forum. So do share your questions and insights, but avoid marketing in there. So we also want you to know that if you don't have a proper name, you're not possible to recognize who you are. You might be removed before the breakout room. Fernanda will try to reach out to understand who you are, but if not, you might be removed. Also respect the discussions in the breakout rooms will follow Chatham rules, which means you can refer to the general insights, but not who said what and not specific names. This webinar and the panel is being recorded, and we will share that later on. Nothing in the breakout rooms are recorded. This brings me over to the opportunity to introduce to you Ron Sunius, who works both as a senior advisor to the Boston Consulting Group and as a director in residence with INSEAD Corporate Governance Centre. He will be co-presenting with Alice Breeden. They have both been very involved in this research, and Alice is a partner in Heidrick Struggles. She's also running the board practice in EMEA and Africa and leads many of the board insights across the world. So welcome very much, Ron and Alice, and over to you.
Thank you. Why don't I kick off on behalf of both of us? Maybe if you just go forward one page, Liselott, we can...
Is this 8? Yes, I checked it in my...
is there some echo? Is that my system? Is someone not on mute? All right, I'll keep going. Apologies. Well, lovely to see you all, and thank you, Liselott, for the introduction and the setup there. My name, as you said, is Alice Breeden. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to share the findings of our most recent research report, and also to share some of the things we've been finding in terms of trends, insights from the research, the roundtables, and the work we do day to day with boards across the region and across the world. Just by way of introduction, as Lisa said, I'm a partner here based in London at Heidrick Struggles. I also co-lead our CEO and board practice for Europe and Africa. And as you mentioned, I lead our board consulting work globally. So the work I'm doing a lot of is board effectiveness, board review, and so forth. So that's me. And as I say, very happy to be here. Ron.
Yes, thanks, Alice. So my name is Ron. I work as a senior advisor with BCG, where I mostly work with organizations to integrate sustainability into both corporate governance and corporate strategy. Director in residence with the INSEAD Corporate Governance Centre mentioned before, and in addition, with a few friends, we run a think tank, again, with a focus on sustainability, but taking more a public policy angle.
Perfect. Thank you, Ron. So Lisa, if you could go on another page for me. Thank you. So just to ground us in what we're looking at here, and thank you to all of those who participated in the survey. I am delighted to be part of this partnership with BCG and with INSEAD Centre for Corporate Governance. From my perspective, the journey began maybe 2 or 4 years ago, 3, Ron, I forget now. But I know on all sides, and obviously with INSEAD and in BCG too, there has been a huge amount of effort, research, thinking, and energy around this topic for many, many years. So 2021, I think our first report came out when we came together to really try to understand what was going on, how boards are thinking, how boards are feeling, how organizations are really getting to grips with the sustainability agenda, and what the impact of that is in terms of strategic intent and action, governance, leadership skills, and organizational effectiveness more broadly. So I think all of us recognize boards are getting busier and busier and busier. And certainly from my personal perspective, we wanted to be able to help boards make sense of this very important topic and learn from others and have a perspective and a point of view that could be helpful to help organizations really shift the dial, as we know we all need to do in a very accelerated fashion. So brief history of the relationship there, and I'm sure Ron will say more when he picks up the baton a bit later about that and INSEAD and BCG's involvement here. But as Heidrick Struggles, we're thrilled and happy to be part of this ongoing research partnership. So if we move on to just share with you what we plan to do, again, as Lisa said, it's just, we've got maybe 5 or 6 pages, a short number of PowerPoints just to give you an overview of the research. I know you may already have seen it, and if you haven't, it's accessible. We can send it around if we haven't already. And as I say, thank you so much for those who did participate. Our previous surveys had a much less number of participants, I might say. So as we ground ourselves in the research and what it tells us, we thought it'd be helpful just to share with you who responded this time. So we had nearly 900 responses, which I think is 3 times what we had in the previous research, if I'm right, from 45 countries, 19 industries. Half of the respondents are in organizations with over $1 billion of revenue. The vast majority are non-executive directors or chairs of boards. And we were very pleased to see very senior tenure. So we have board members active, working on boards who have 6 or more. I think it's 70% there, 6+ years of board tenure, and a good spread of industries on the page there. So I think we felt this is a pretty robust report. We've also done, as we'll share with you, roundtables across the world. Ron and I and our various colleagues in different places and geographies. We've done 11 or 12 now, I think, globally, and met with more than 200 directors face-to-face to understand how they're thinking, but also dig into some of the whys and wherefores of what we're seeing in the data here. So strong grounding and super interesting in terms of who responded and what we heard. So that grounds us in who and what and where. If I share with you a few of the overall findings, I think one of the first things we found, and we were talking about it just as we were preparing for the call this morning, there's a huge amount of work going on at board level. Obviously, we have so many issues. If you take the macro economic environment, AI, cyber, COVID, so many big topics, but then clearly the focus of this report is sustainability. We see, 2/3 of respondents talking about the increased time requirement for board directors, particularly as a result of sustainability and the conversations that need to happen in that space. And the things that they're doing more with that time, they're also having to expend more time on long-term succession planning, which is work that we see a lot of, board effectiveness and refreshment of the board, thinking about the CEO succession and so forth, and also thinking about where to have those conversations, whether it be through advisory boards, committees, and differing kind of governance, governance requirements for boards. And I know Ron and I, in our differing worlds and spheres, have seen a lot of different changes and movement and progression in terms of where and when those conversations are happening. But suffice to say, all the directors strongly felt there's a lot more time being asked of them because of the focus on this topic. And when you looked at that by sector, we also saw, as you might expect, in things like finance and insurance, it's even higher. We're showing some average data here. In the breakdown by sector, I think we saw that at more like 77 or 80% of directors talking about a substantively increased amount of time spent on these topics. So lots of pressure on board members' time, which I'm sure we'll all agree with and understand and resonate. And then if we look at the next page, we thought this was an interesting finding. Increase from previous years, I think, more clarity of understanding about what the challenges are, more ability to kind of speak to them, to say, yes, I know what they are, I know what we're doing in this space, we have defined our terms and our space somewhat. But then we saw potentially a knowledge gap here, which I think will also perhaps resonate with this group. Be interested to hear about that in the breakouts. But on the page here, we see 29% of our respondents do not feel they have enough knowledge to challenge the plans that are in place or to even monitor the execution. And we also saw here that boards typically are relying very much on internal management, executive teams for their updates. I think 89% board members are relying on executives, 89% in terms of a source to see how things are going. Are they on track? Are things being executed and delivered to plan? So while we're so pleased about the confidence levels improving on the left of the page, and I think there's a question mark there. Are board members today able, knowledgeable to understand how we're doing and to challenge that if they're saying they don't feel they are, and they're also seeking reassurance from their own executive teams primarily. We also see this vary a lot by sector, as you might expect, and the number of issues that are at the top of the list vary by sector and so forth, but I won't go into that now. But certainly, I think a push for knowledge and a knowledge gap that we see from the boards that we surveyed. And then one more data point on the next slide we thought might be helpful to share is, why are people caring about this now? We also asked, what's the reason that you're driving this agenda forward? And we thought it was quite interesting that it's not necessarily for financial reasons, not today and not necessarily for tomorrow either, in terms of what's driving the focus on sustainability. So very low scores here, and also this idea that sustainability will impact our financial results today or tomorrow is just not showing up necessarily in the people that we surveyed. The reasons that people gave us for why they may focus on it now is because it's the right thing to do. It's sometimes for regulatory pressure, which is good and proper to get change to happen. Talent attraction, so making sure leaders will come to work with an organization because it's demanding of them to focus on it. And then also clearly the access to investor capital driving the focus and action on it as well. So that's some of the reasons why that we thought was interesting too. And then on to the next, if we could. We also asked what the board members believed in terms of what was going on today, and what should things look like in terms of future state. And if you look at the numbers across the bottom where our red arrow is, big delta there between whether sustainability is integrated today, 38%, and the highest number there on the bottom of where people think it should be in terms of integration of sustainability with business strategy, which I know is where Ron is going to lead us on to next. Over to you, Ron.
Yes, thanks, Alice. When we do these questionnaires, one of the last question we always ask is, what would you like us to deep dive on in the next version, the next iteration of our research? So the previous one, you all, or at least those that participated, indicated that they would like to have a deep dive on corporate strategy. So this report is about corporate strategy, at least the second bit. We looked into that. And it's interesting to see how there is this divide between what's happening today and the more long term. And so, you know, when I take a couple of steps back and look at the work that we have done with the Corporate Governance Centre over the last, 7 or 8 years, you clearly see that boards are getting up to speed. So that's the good news. They are getting up to speed because of regulatory pressure, reporting pressure, stakeholder pressure. These are the 3 most important ones. And that's also where they spend most time. All these new and upcoming reporting requirements, specifically from the EU, but also in the US, is taking a lot of time from companies in general, but also the board, because at the end, the board signs off on these numbers. So then when we started to look into, okay, but what does that mean more long term? You see that boards are less clear. So this section we talk about has a mix of a specific focus on ESG and sustainability, but also more generally on the business environment, including stuff like AI and geopolitical shifts and inflation and what have you. And then it's actually interesting to see that that, as said, there is less clarity. And if you look at this slide and the numbers here, I think, you know, we sort of had also an internal debate about, there are 2 ways to look at this, right? You could look at it in a sort of positive way, where you say, you know, take the first one, clear understanding of long-term trends and value. You could say 86% actually have a reasonable idea of what's happening. If you take a more negative view, you could say 66% have really not nailed this yet. And I think it depends on the organization, the industry that they're in, the environment that they're in, which sort of lens you should look at this. But I think for each of you individually, it's interesting to understand, you know, are we really understanding how the world is changing, and what that means to the way we operate and where we operate. If you go more down this chart towards the end, you see the confidence numbers really going down quite quickly. For instance, in do we have sufficient capability to scan for weak signals? And if we do that, and if we understand what these weak signals are we then able to turn that into competitive advantage? And you actually see that those that lead in industries are quite good at these bottom 2. So I think it's, in overall, it gives an idea that yes, there is a lot of stuff happening with boards and organizations in terms of sustainability and ESG. But when it comes to, you know, what does that mean more long term, and are we really understanding what that means to our organization, to our corporate portfolio, to our product portfolio, to our supply chains, it becomes less clear. If you want to flip to the next slide, please. What we did when we looked at the data is we looked at a specific section of companies that we started to call the leading edge companies. And really the definition of these leading edge companies, the 47, were those companies that indicated themselves, or the directors that indicated themselves, that there is a very high impact on financials, and even you know, an existential threat to the organization long term. So we selected these 74 companies, excuse me, And we looked at the differences, and you actually see that there are quite some differences in how these boards look at the long term. They're actually better on all fronts, and they understand much better, how the long term is impacting the way that they do business. They are better prepared. They are better at looking at weak signals, and they are better at turning that into competitive advantage. And I think that's an interesting thing. The question here, of course, is: are these companies that have been, bashed already in the past, and had to learn from experiencing it to get better at it, or are they actually understanding that the world is changing, and hence will have created capabilities to tackle it? Probably it's a combination of both. Then, if you go to the next slide, as Alice mentioned, we have held roundtables around the world, from Singapore to Paris to Amsterdam to the Nordics, to Houston, to really have Chatham House rules, closed session, and small session roundtables with high-level directors, and there are a few things that we sort of summarized from what we heard in these roundtables. And the first is really around, why is it that only 80% of the directors report that sustainability and ESG is integrated into strategy? And you really see three sort of areas. The first one is the integration challenge itself. Looking at a combination of E, S, and G is already difficult. Often, if you zoom in deeper in the E, it is mostly about carbon. And of course, E is not only about carbon, and sustainability is not only about E, but is also including E, S, and G. And then even if you zoom out a little bit further, integrating sustainability into all the other strategic long-term threats and opportunities that are out there, given AI and geopolitical shifts and all that sort of stuff. Integrating this into how you do business becomes a challenge. The next one really is the horizon challenge. Most of the companies that do strategy reviews look out 3 to 5 years. And if you look how these opportunities and challenges from sustainability are actually expiring, that is mostly beyond the 3 to 5 year horizon. And it really takes an effort to make sure to include this longer term. And as one of the participants said, that also means you need to start shaping the world rather than just following what others are doing. And to shape the world, that means, getting into new frontiers, taking risk, and that requires actually some convincing. And then there is the complexity challenge to integrate all of this. We see actually that directors of heavy asset companies and companies that run longer business cycles are better at integrating all these elements into long-term strategy. And I think the quote that is mentioned here from an aerospace producer is a nice one. I mean, they are selling products that have to be attractive in a world 20 to 30 years from now. So they, by definition, have a need to understand how that world looks like. If we then go to the next slide, we also try to summarize sort of what's the learning and what we heard from the board members at these roundtables, that you can perhaps take with you or consider in your own environment. And we basically put them under three headings. The first one, sharpening governance. 4 elements to consider here. Board refreshment. Is the board and the members of the board currently, current? Are the people that are on that board able to understand what's going on in the world and to drive the company forward in a direction that is actually meaningful? And board refreshment can mean, rethink your competency matrix, rethink who you will hire when a board member retires. It can be a more proactive action. One of the board members that participated in a roundtable mentioned that when he as a board was forced to talk to stakeholders about their ESG approach, he replaced a few board members simply because he didn't think they were up to the task. So he was more proactive about it. Expand knowledge base is another one. Of course, all of you participating in this session are expanding the knowledge base, or at least we hope so, to bring you some new insights. But of course, also you can bring in both internal and external experts to understand better what is going on. You could consider starting advisory boards that can help you more structurally on the long term. But as one of the directors of an energy company in Houston said, training the board is not something that you do 30 minutes at the end of a board meeting. They actually had away days. They had a structural training program for 2 years where they brought in all sorts of experts from internal and external to really start to understanding what is shaping the world and how things are changing. Others include integrating ESG into board agenda. We have mentioned that before, we talked about it. And transparency. Transparency becomes increasingly important and will help stakeholders to understand why certain decisions have been made. The second one that we sort of grouped was digging deep on the issues. What we find often and what we hear from board members a lot is that, for instance, on strategic ambition, there can be much more. And, if you really dig deep and understand what's going on, you might actually find ways to get there quicker, to get there in more depth, and to actually start shaping the world rather than following what others are doing. Look at scarcity, addressing scarcity, if that's in terms of people. Of course, that's an important one, but also in terms of ingredients and components. Crop failures are happening increasingly. How is that affecting your company? And also here start to look at, again, more deeply. So not only your first tier suppliers, but also your second and third tier suppliers, because they might have an effect. Also grabbing opportunity, not only within the remits of your own organization, but also outside of your own organization. Often sustainability, ESG type issues are not an individual company issue. Start looking at the environment that you operate in. Try to work together with suppliers, with other companies, and to actually reshape the business environment, reshape industries. And the same for enabling transformation at speed. As a board, you are at a key position to actually support management and encourage management to go faster and deeper. And last but not least, the thing that we really heard where leading board members and boards excel is in modeling leadership, personal leadership. First of all, in building the confidence. One of the experiences from the roundtables that was quite impactful for me is actually the one that we had in Houston, where we had energy companies and heavy users of energy companies, directors at the roundtable. And I became really prepared because of the ESG backlash in the US, and I was really curious what was going to happen. And in fact, I found directors there to be quite nuanced about the whole thing. And they said, yes, we understand the ESG backlash, and to a certain extent, we actually agree and understand why this is happening. But it doesn't mean that we don't need to change as an organization. We do need to change as an organization. The world is changing, our industry is changing, and we have actually taken decisions on where we want to go. And not all of these directions of travel were the same. They all had different ways of travel, but they all had the arguments to back up why they were traveling into a certain direction. And that's what I mean with confidence. In this world where you have competing stakeholder demands, you can't satisfy everyone. So you have to make choices, and making these choices requires that you are bold, but understand and actually give arguments to those that you do not follow why you take certain choices. And the last one really is bridging divisions, actually making sure that in between these stakeholders and different stakeholders' demands, you start to make, you give clarity on why you take certain decisions. At this stage, I leave it at this to a bit of feedback from what we heard at the roundtables, and I hand over back to Alice to close it off with some final thoughts.
Thank you, Ron. And yes, just to finish off, I think this is our last page, and to echo what Ron said, the roundtables that we've been part of, and I've been in London, Zurich, Netherlands, Finland, many mainly European ones for my part, but meeting the people who come to those who are very senior chief executives and non-executive directors of some of the major businesses globally, as Ron said, and those meetings have been really impactful and really interesting, and I think really bring to life what people are grappling with. The messages we wanted to leave you with here, I mean, what Ron was saying about the 3 things to do on the previous page, sometimes I think can be difficult, can be overwhelming, and it's how do we actually shift and make progress. So trying to bring it back down perhaps to the individual level or the personal level, or what people tell us in the round tables and Chatham House rules when we're having a conversation over tea or wine or whatever it might be. And the things that I hear, we hear a lot that we've had and we've talked about a lot with our clients too. The first one would be about reframing, the need to reframe the question. Are you looking in the right place, forward, backwards? Are you talking about risks, or are you talking about opportunities? And many of the business leaders we met said there's a real need for boards today, and individual board members, to try and reframe the way this discussion is happening, not just about risk in a kind of downward view, although that's obviously very much part of it, but what's the opportunity, what's the upside, what's in it for us if we get this right, and for our suppliers and customers too, in terms of the whole system. So that kind of reframing, as Ron was saying, it's not just one company that can sort this, but as an individual, if you're able to reframe and think about, are you having the right conversation, are you thinking about it in the right place? The second one really about learning. It's been a theme of what we've said today, this morning, but this piece on the page here about being realistic and pragmatic about the complexities. Do we know what we're talking about? What do we know? What do we not know? How do we figure out how we're going to plug that gap, even with small steps? It doesn't have to be great big development programs, but how can we just learn where we're at and where we should be? And then the final piece I would say is having courage. We've heard that a lot through the people we've spoken to. It takes courage to pick this up and do things, and I'm sure everyone on this call, as we're here in this topic, knows that and thinks about that all the time. But as we look about these questions and the thoughts to leave you with here, when we think about the legacy, the community, some of these bigger questions, it takes some courageous decision making, at pace to get companies really shifting the dial. So on that note, I think that's us. Lieselette, back to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a really insightful, and as you were sharing, we did share the report earlier, we will share it again. Now it's time for you guys to actually tell us, where are you on this? And I have just launched the poll, and the question is around, Do our board hold regular reviews on the progress of integrating sustainability into business strategy? And whether you are agreeing or disagreeing to this. So it's about the integration of sustainability into the business strategy, which means you have to look at both the risk, but definitely also the opportunity side. So we have a little more than a third, I think, have answered now. So I'll wait another 5 seconds if somebody wants to shoot something in, and then I'm going to end the poll. Okay, and here we have the result. So the result, and maybe Ron, do you want to comment on this one? No, okay.
Sure. No, sorry, yeah. I was looking for my unmute button.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is in line what we see elsewhere. This is in line what we see elsewhere. Disagree, neutral, almost. Yeah, it comes to sort of 50-50 on the agree, yeah. slightly higher.
Right.
So yeah, and there is always, you know, in these sort of research there is slightly a bias because, you know, the participants in this session will probably have a you know, a slightly higher interest in sustainability.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, so in line with what we see elsewhere.
Thank you. So about half actually works to integrate it and half still have an opportunity to move forward. So now we're going to discuss this in the breakout rooms. And what we want you to discuss, we want you to try to run it a bit like a board meeting. And we want you to discuss, assign a chair, assign a vice chair, and then discuss what board practices contributes to boards more swiftly integrating sustainability into business strategy, and what interventions should boards do. And when you come back, we hope you can share 1 or 2 board practices and 1 intervention that you think would be worth trying. So we are now going to automatically put you into breakout rooms, and of course remind you that it's Chatham rules in the breakout rooms, and we will automatically bring you back. Okay. We know that 15 minutes are shorter in breakout rooms than in reality. We've had that experience before. This time, we're actually going to ask you to put your feedback into the chat. So 1 or 2 board practices, 1 intervention, and the person who was reporting it back, if you can put it into the chat. And if you have any questions, of course, and then Fernanda will help us pick that up for the panel discussion. So we're going into a panel discussion, and I'll first just introduce the people. So I'm delighted to have my chairman, Julie Badley, joining. So Julie's chair of the Climate Governance Initiative and of Chapter 0 in UK. And she's also a NED of TI Fluid Systems and a Marshal of Cambridge Holdings and Ubiquity. So she's a NED as all of us. Another previous board colleague of mine, Jeff Scott, is here, and he's the chair of NatWest TDS and Perspective, and he's the co-founder of Rewired Earth, and he's also a board member of INSEAD Directors Network. Bent, unfortunately, had just been called out in another board meeting, so we'll see if she ends up joining us. We are then delighted to have Sonja Tatar joining us. She's the Executive Director of the INSEAD Corporate Governance Institute, and she's also on the INSEAD Wendel International Centre for Family Enterprises. She's also on the board of Chapter 0 in France. And then we're bringing back Ron and Alice. So if everybody can be on mute when we have the panel, that would be fantastic. So I'm inviting Julie, Jeff, Scott, Sonja to join us. And if you can put them on spotlight, Fernanda, that'd be great. And I I want to just start with, of course, welcoming you all and then ask Julie. So how do you see boards engaging in setting strategic ambition? What are the challenges of setting these strategic ambitions, and do you see any leading practices in this?
Thank you, Lisa. And I will answer this partly from feedback we get from our UK membership of Chapter Zero, and partly from my own boards, and which you won't recognize the names probably. So they are a very big global manufacturer, a big property and defense company, and a professional services company. So quite a broad set of sectors. I think this is a very, very interesting question, because all my experience over far too many years, as you can see from the grey hair, tells me that boards need to be ambitious. They need to set ambition, because without ambition, we won't get action. But we also need to have this pragmatic view that Alice mentioned, looking at ambition and achievability. And so the best practices that I have seen have been where boards have really stretched to set the ambition they want to set out for the organization, particularly driven by customer views, employee views, investor views, lender views, but being prepared then to iterate around that when they're developing their plans to make sure that those ambitions are still relevant. But if you don't set the ambition in the first place, you're not going to get the action. And I think that the non-executive role in all of this is to encourage, be courageous and encourage the ambition, but then to be absolutely sure that the board commissions the work required, whether it be from external or internal skills, to really sort of road test that, turn it into a robust plan, put short-term measures in, and then be prepared to cycle round, so that they're not doing greenwashing, but equally they are they're keeping an eye on what is achievable. And I think the leading companies, last point, I suppose, leading companies are seeing this as an opportunity primarily, but also are very conscious of the threat of inaction. So my global manufacturer is in the auto sector. I mean, our whole business strategy is around electric vehicles. The whole strategy for the business is driven by a massive shift from our customers, who are people like Volkswagen, Mercedes, etc., who've basically in 4 years gone from saying there won't be electric vehicles to everything is about electric vehicles. So it's absolutely front and center of the business strategy. Our property business, the biggest property development certainly in the UK over the next decade, maybe even in Europe. This is building a whole airport's worth of mixed retail housing, etc. Net zero. It's going to be net zero. I'm not quite sure how, but it's going to be net zero. So I think that the board just has a very, very important leadership role to play in these conversations.
I think it's very interesting, the comment you said, I'm not sure how, because I think that is actually part of putting out the very high ambition. You can't know exactly how when you put it out. So I love that comment. Thank you so much for your insights, Julie. We'll come back. Sonja, so one of the things that the reports identified is this scarcity of talent and capability on the boards. So what steps are you seeing that boards are taking, and how can it be expedited?
Sure, thank you, Liselott. So let me build, first of all, on the scarcity of talent, because the way we see it is there are 3 levels. First, of course, there is the current pool of boards and the boards who are serving already on boards and governance for companies, where they need to expedite their knowledge, and of course where they upskill. And we see that trend on individual basis. There is this upskilling coming on boards where they're learning about sustainability, coming into programs, all of this. That's one. The second pool, we look at the experts who are out there, but they are not integrated in the boards, actually. So they have the knowledge, but at the same time, they might not be ready to be board members themselves. So there should be, in this reshaping of the governance, how to bring in the expert and, you know, to help and support the board, even if they are not board members, or they're not ready, or, you know, they are not serving as boards, but at the same time, they should not be thrown in the boardroom and just left alone, and they are the ones to drive the change and do everything, because we know it from experience on the digital transformation. This did not work. To just parachute one person in there and say, yeah, help us, and you do it. It's all on your shoulder. So the knowledge should be onto all the boards and all the constituents. And the third pool, which I would like to mention as well, all of these rising board members' potentials that potentially coming in, and they have already knowledge about sustainability, and there is a need for supporting platform, but also for their onboarding. So that this is about the lack of talent. The scarcity of talent means talent relative to supporting the transformation and the leadership of the sustainability. And going to your point, what we see and how to expedite it. Of course, to drive the sustainability agenda and leadership, there are two big components which are very, very important. The first one, there should be alignment between the board and the management. If there is no alignment, this cannot happen. So, of course, there are all of these individual development knowledge from the management, but also the boards. But at some point, there should be collaboration and collective meetings at some point as well to have that alignment, right? And the second thing, which is a big thing, and we can carry on that conversation, which is about the strategy, the integration of the sustainability into strategy. And what we see, will be surprised that what we see is that there is still unclarity who owns the strategy. What does it mean, integration? Also, what's the role of the board? What's the role of the management in all of this? And from there, of course, what is important is the board needs to have that external, that perspective, the ecosystem, value chain perspective versus the operation, which is to the team and the execution. But again, there need clarity on the integration of strategy and what does it mean long-term strategy. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I think it's very clear, and it's coming out from several of you that it has to be integrated in strategy. You can't just measure something in parallel. One of the things, Jeff, I'm directing to you now, that came up from the research is that there's too much dependency on receiving the information only from the management team or internally. So how do you see that, and how do you see boards handling that, and do you see any trends in changing that?
Yeah, I think boards have a really delicate balance between their stakeholder demands, which are clear, very clear, sort of equity for your community, you know, so the way in which we deal with the people who interact with our business, and then the economic environment and the impact that we have in terms of climate change and all of the other things that we know we need to deal with. And the issue that we've got, I mean, 89%, I think it was from the research, were people who just looked at internal data. And the challenge we have is, even if you look at external data, so if I looked at Bloomberg or MSCI or Refinitiv, they all give me a very different view. So it really is a challenge, but having good metrics is one of the most important things. We don't disagree about how we treat costs on our balance sheet or P&L. We have international financial reporting standards. So regulation is going to be important for the way in which sustainability moves forward. But I think what we need to get to is a common language now, a common language which we all understand. Even if I went around the room and said, what does ESG mean to you? You would have 100 different things. So for me, if we can make financial markets the most powerful force for good instead of being the most destructive, that would be our ambition. So it's something we're obviously very keen on from a Rewide Earth perspective. And that means, as a board, do you genuinely understand what your customers and your staff care about? So let's use the UN SDGs as a framework. Once you have that, do you know how you impact against those same metrics? And if you do, and we can measure that through the supply chain, then financial markets can actually reward businesses for doing the right things that are supporting things that customers want. And that's the fundamental systemic change that needs to happen with the way in which we think about capitalism. So boards need to take on that as an issue to say, do you know what your customers care about? Do you understand your materiality in each of those segments? And don't be afraid of making mistakes. If you are transparent and if you are really clear on why you are doing what you're doing and you're measuring it consistently and it's comparable, then even if you do the wrong things, if you correct those things, you will get much more benefit from markets and from consumers. There's just this lack of trust that's the issue.
Right. And thank you so much for that. I think I mean, I can just talk for myself. You know, the first time it comes up that we're going to get worse T's and C's because our sustainability plan wasn't good enough, that is a real aha from a board level, and a very big incentive to actually keep driving that. It does have direct impact as soon as you start to involve yourself in financial services. Ron, I think one of the things that has been very much in focus up until now has been the risk side, but you have identified that a key driver in this is actually the board's opportunity side. And how do they work with that? So what are you seeing here and what kind of good practices are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Lieselot. I mean, I would put it slightly different.
Okay.
In the sense that so you're right about the risk, but what we see now is that boards are very occupied with helping management and steering into the all the reporting demands that are out there and the ones that will still come out, and that's very much, I wouldn't say risk, but it is sort of, what you are expected to do.
Right.
And then you can still set certain targets. And of course, one is, if you look at carbon reduction and net zero, one is a bit quicker and one can be quicker and the other cannot be quicker or want to be quicker. But everything that has to do with this reporting and target setting, most of it, I wouldn't say all, but most of it is still, almost operational improvements. And my experience is that excites a few people to a high extent, but mostly and not board members. If you look to the other extreme, and that's why we're pushing so much for integrating into strategy. If you step away from, even trying to define what ESG means or what sustainability means, and simply start to look, or maybe I shouldn't say simply, but start to look at, how is the world changing? What is driving these changes? And what does that mean for our organization? And are we in 20, 30 years from now, or 10, 20 years from now, given those changes, still able to create value in the way that we do today? Are there ways we can create more value, different value, or are there certain value drivers that will disappear given how the world changes? And then you start to look back and say, okay, well, what does that actually mean to our corporate portfolio? Are there certain businesses that we could better sell? Are there certain businesses that we should actually buy? What does that mean to our product portfolio? Do we have an opportunity to create new products or services? Do we have existing products that we need to change? Or will there certain products that will not be in demand anymore given the changes that are going on? those discussions
Mm.
do engage board members, because then you are at the heart of where assets will be allocated. And so taking that angle and taking that view to the board is, in our experience, the way to engage board members.
Right, very good. And in several of our boards right now, we have a very big push to go to reporting, and that occupies a lot of the time. So I also want to ask you, Lee, how do you see this balance of actually trying to get for the drive into the business strategy and the opportunity side versus the reporting side?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think that constantly boards need to make sure that reporting is not seen as just a compliance activity, but reporting is regarded as one of the levers. And if I may just share with your audience, Liselott, a bit of the work that we're doing in the UK nation, as opposed to the UK chapter, on transition plan task force reporting. On the 9th of October, the UK will launch a disclosure framework and a guidance for how to do transition plans. We've been working on it for 18 months. It will finish the final piece will finish next February, but it really is a very, very comprehensive view of how to do transition planning, picking up on ISSB and TCFD. So it's not trying to sort of duplicate things that have already happened, looking at sectors as well as standard approaches. And I never thought I would say this about being involved in a regulatory task force, but it is really good work. And it will be really valuable globally, even if you're not working exactly under the same regulatory framework. So I would really encourage people to plug in TPT on the 9th of October and have a look, because it really takes you from reporting to planning and changing the whole system, as opposed to just looking at your sort of internal operations. So I think it's really important that we reframe a word that's been used earlier, reframe that thinking around disclosure, because disclosure is important, but it's not about ticking boxes. Just a final point too about how we actually accelerate all of this. I don't know whether this is universally the case, but certainly in the UK, the board operates very much through committees. Committees are really important to how you drive different aspects. And one of the changes I've seen in the last year, but it's been a bit slow in coming, is getting this really embedded into the work of the audit committee, who haven't sort of been working on this stuff, but actually are going to be really key going forward. And in the UK law, they're going to be obliged to sign off on all these, on all the targets, the audit committee. So that's going to put the spotlight. We all know about remuneration. I'm sure everybody on this call has been in lots of conversations, but how many nominations committees have actually really looked at this board composition issue? So if we want to really accelerate all of this, I think we need to get it into all strands of our business activity, strategy, but also, you know, every department, finance, HR, marketing, they've all got to be all over this, because it's going to affect every aspect of what we do.
Thank you so much, Julian. Maybe we should also share that we will help share that some of that insight through Climate Governance Initiative and all of the chapters, because we do find that that is kind of trailblazing and that we can all learn a lot from that. So Fernanda, I wanted to understand, are there any questions in the chat, or is there any other comments in the chat you find interesting?
Super interesting comments, and a lot of your very interesting interventions. I just feel like I would like to follow up on everything. But let me bring up some of the points that I think I see, some of the patterns I see on the interventions coming out from the groups. Quite a few people have been talking about education, mindset, the talent of the board, of the organization, but also of the board. Like, for example, Danielle Loreda was mentioning visits, involving experts, so a lot of things around education. Some groups brought up some of my favorite topics, of course, seeing it from an innovation perspective, not just the regulatory pressure, but also seeing it as an opportunity, like was mentioned by Torben Hage, for example. Quite a few groups have also been looking at and making parallels with digitalization. Orban de Remont, for example, was talking about multi-stakeholder data-driven decision-making culture, which is also very interesting. Let's get the facts straight in order to make good decisions. And Cecilia Sedig was also making a parallel towards digitalization and AI. So these are disruptions and how to deal with them. And finally, also Philip Lingard had a very interesting comment. I mean, all the comments are super interesting, but some of the things I picked up, making also a parallel between risk management that he was mentioning, made a journey from just being something that you had external competence, external help with, to start to have the journey to become a core business activity and a real expertise within the organization. So these were some of the things that I have picked up from the groups. No specific questions, but a lot of really interesting interventions.
That is great. And it's also a lot of things everybody can take away and go forward with. Alice, I wanted to pick up this thing that comes up around capability and education. What do you see in this area? How can we increase, how can we expedite this area?
Yeah, thank you, Liselette. It's a very good question. I think, we talked about, I love the thought about the mindsets on the board. It's about, at the end of the day, it's about having a group of people, 8, 9, 10, 11 people doing something differently when they come together, saying different things, tasking the executives to do something differently. So it's about those mindsets. And I love that comment that was in the chat there and was just talked about on that. But how do you get there? How do you create that in the boardroom? I think listening to you all, it's incredibly clear, and it resonates with what we see in the market. We don't get people coming to us to say, can we have a sustainability non-executive director? We might have had that some time ago, like we did with digital, but it's absolutely not the case. Now we need experienced non-executives who've run businesses or had experience of sitting on boards of large complex businesses where there are these strategic challenges, where things happen, and therefore you need to regroup as a group of individuals on the board and think about what you do, how you spend your time, how you challenge the executive, how you get the expertise in the room. Having said that, we do get, I think we did some research our side, I think it was separate from the work we've done with you all, but it was sort of 15% of non-executive director searches have the request for something to do with climate, net zero, sustainability in it, which is relatively, I think, low. It kind of doesn't appear on our skills matrix very often, and we try to challenge and put that in, because whilst you need experienced, wise board directors, you also need a basic level of understanding of what's happening in quite a complex technical issue. So it's a bit of both. You've got to be able to understand what you don't know, and you've got to have a base level understanding of what's going on and what it means and so forth. But curiosity, reframing, courage, those sorts of things I think are important.
Right. I saw in one of our good practices that somebody was sharing earlier that people have actually started to do specific education sheets for individual directors and for the board. And I think that was fantastic, because if it's blank, that also says something, right? Which is very interesting. So I think if we can just focus in the last piece on this time of transformation. We should all have started, we shouldn't have even begun doing some of the things we're doing, but we should also have started our transformation earlier. But how can we then speed up transformation? And I wanted to hear Julie and Jeff. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I do think that we absolutely have to get airtime onto this. We need to get it onto the agenda, and we need to give it enough time. And it's no good just having, half an hour once a quarter. We did a calculation with some of the colleagues in the UK on how many board meetings we've got to the point where we have to get to halve our emissions
Right.
And it's something like 50 board meetings. We have to have halved our emissions. I mean, it's insane. You know, they're still going up. So I think getting the voices into the boardroom that can really just sharpen up these messages around speed are very, very important. And some of those voices might be, if I call them softer, like voices of maybe some of our younger employees, or, you know, getting stuff back from people within the organization. We know that there was a survey just very recently that 18 to 24-year-olds are choosing, you know, their employer according to whether they're good on this stuff. So getting some of those young voices, but also just bearing in mind what boards are like. We don't get a lot of external voices into a boardroom. So where I've been, we've had the lawyers in. The lawyers are really good. They have really started to understand this stuff, and they can really put what sits on the board. You know, making sure the auditors and the remuneration consultants are really all echoing these right messages can actually then sharpen the focus within the boardroom, I think. And of course, investor feedback, which is a little bit of a two-edged sword, because they sometimes talk one game and then they operate differently. But nevertheless, just asking these questions forces the executive then to be communicating. So I think it's all about getting away from this notion, and Ron mentioned it, that this is just a long-term thing. I mean, you only have to look at the last 6 weeks and look at the wildfires, look at the flooding, look at the hurricanes. Look, this is not just a long-term thing. This is going to hit our balance sheets in the next 5 years. And frankly, any company that has not done an impairment review with scenarios around sustainability in mind, they just are deluding themselves. I cannot believe that so few assets have been impaired so far.
Yeah,
it's just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think it's those sort of processes that boards are used to, as well as getting some of these different voices into the room that will sort of just catch that mindset piece, because it's commercial and it's current mindset. You've got to get both.
Yes, yeah. I think it's interesting. In US, the government has actually gone out and said, based on insurance, that they have $1 billion disasters every 18th month. And I'm just waiting for Europe and Asia to actually have a similar comment. Yes, you also work with getting increased and better information to the boards. Can you share something with us and how that can actually expedite transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think boards need to recognize they should be collaborating on the what. So what outcomes should we be doing, not just as an individual business, but as an industry, as a country, as a collective. So what role are you playing in helping move that forward? And I'm sure Julia's seen a lot of that with some of the participants of their groups. And then you compete on the how. But when you compete on the how, be really honest and realistic. So I thought it was a really useful point from Alice. You know, what sort of people do you want on your board? I want curious skeptics. I want people who are there to challenge the status quo and who see sustainability not as a department or as a board separate. It builds in what Julia was saying, in your audit committee, in your risk committee, in every strategic discussion you have, because it's not separate. It is the way we have to do business, and history will not be kind to those businesses that don't get that. And it's coming much quicker. I mean, I think if you can listen to some climatologists, they will say we don't go from 1.5 to 1.8 to 2. It's a steady state thing. Once you've lost the polar ice caps, once you've lost permafrost, that's coming. So it might take you till 2050 to see the full impact, but believe me, businesses that don't plan for that are missing the point. And so for me, getting good quality data, so that's what I'm all about. We're a not-for-profit organization for Rewired Earth, but we're saying let's collaborate globally. There are thousands of people working on this, but the last thing we need is 20,000 different metrics. Carbon markets have 70 different carbon markets, so the price of carbon differs. You say, and people don't care whether once you bought the credit. I don't care what happens to the forest, because as a company, I've got the credit. Thank you very much. And the people who are looking after the forest, they don't really care whether it's good or bad or indifferent, because they've now got the money. So there are things that are going on, and I'm being a little cynical, but what we have to do is be really honest. What is your footprint, not just against carbon? Everyone gets that now, but what about all of the other clean water and sanitation? What about no poverty? Those are the things. So when the board looks at this, don't think that the interconnected nature of what climate change is happening. It covers all of those things. And again, your customers, your investors, and your employees will absolutely want to know where you stand on these. So for me, having a common set of metrics, using a common language, and getting that embedded within all businesses everywhere is certainly my goal to try and achieve. But then you compete on the how. So and that will allow businesses to prosper.
So I was going to ask all of you guys to give a short recommendation, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to treat you in the same way as all of the participants. Can you please put your recommendations in the chat? And then we'll pick it up from there, because we need to just conclude. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing this fantastic research, but also your very practical experiences. We wanted to let you know that INSEAD has some phenomenal engagements coming up. So how do we effectively unlock value from sustainability? Couldn't be more actually pertinent than that. Then a discussion around the board nomination and rumination committees. What's the trends and the outlooks? Their flag program, Pivoting the Governance Paradigm, will happen in October. You will find all of these events on INSEAD's Corporate Governance website. For the Board's Impact Forum, we have two really important discussions going on. One of them is all around the talent and culture and sustainability, and actually also more around how do we actually connect the sustainability officers into the boards, not necessarily bring them, but how do we even communicate with them? And then, of course, what is board's guidance of AI for sustainability? AI is on all the boardrooms right now, and it's another really interesting topic that we need to get our arms around. So warm welcome, everybody, to check them out and look at that. I also promised, I can see Mary Frankia is here, and you're going to run a very interesting event in US. Do you want to come on, Mary, and just share what it is?
Thank you, Lisa, a lot. And I know that it's early in the US, November 9th through the 11th with INSEAD, and actually Ron, who is joining us today for the event. We have an event in San Francisco at the INSEAD Business Innovation Center, and it will be on the subject of sustainability and building, catalyzing innovations to really bring all of it. You will have 2 days with tons of INSEAD participants showing what technology is doing on a sustainability angle for companies. And I'll be hosting a 1-hour discussion with BCG, similar to what you had today, in looking at how the board can help a company enhance their innovation and their sustainability. We all look at risk, but we also need to look at what we said today, what is strategy. So thanks for letting me.
Thank you so much, Mary. And just closing off, please answer this feedback survey. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thanks to our presenters, panelists, and thanks for everybody engaging in this important topic. Do answer this survey back for us. Thank you, everybody.